good people of YouTube. Welcome to episode 13 of What Makes This Song Special. Before we start this week's episode, I'd just like to thank everybody for your response and reaction to last week's episode. It was a bit of a serious episode, and I'm going to make this one a wee bit more lighthearted. But yes, just a wee snippet last week into my sort of story with Lyme disease and raising a wee bit of awareness for that. And I'd just like to thank everybody for the comments and responses and questions and all sorts of things that I've had come into the various inboxes this week regarding Lyme disease and chronic illness in general. So yeah, thanks so much for that. I'm hoping to raise as much awareness for these types of things as possible on the channel. And but I won't make each week as kind of somber and sad as last week's one. So we'll start this week as always. A quick reminder: what's the episode about? What's the channel about? What's the show about? I take a song each week and link it to a memory. So what does the song make me think about in my life? I talk a wee bit about the story, usually a silly wee story about my life and why a certain song makes me think about that episode of my life. And then talk a wee bit about the band or the artist and do a little bit of a vocal coach reaction to the technique of the singer. And then in part two, as always, I will do my own cover version of the song. So this week's song is a track by British band Keane, and the song's called Somewhere Only We Know. Fantastic song, really a real favourite of mine, and I'll dive straight into the story. So where was it the first time? Always remember the first time I heard a song. I'm able to just go right back into my head and remember exactly where I was the first time I heard it, and then the bigger thing that it reminds me of. So I remember the first time I heard it, me and my now wife, then girlfriend Lindsay, we were in my bedroom one Saturday night at my mum and dad's house, and we just finished watching a film called The Life of David Gale, which is an awesome film for anybody who's not seen that film. The Life of David Gale, an amazing film all about sort of capital punishment. There's an amazing story and some good twists in it as well. So great movie. But yeah, so we'd switched the DVD player off, for those of you who remember DVDs. And what happened when you switched off the DVD player, it would revert back to what you'd been watching on the television before, or on your Skybox or Virgin Box or wherever you are in the world, whatever you watch. It reverted back to, I think it was either VH1 or MTV, basically a music video station. And I was instantly drawn to this awesome Yamaha CP keyboard sound, which only kind of keyboard and piano geeks will understand what I mean by that. But it's the very unique piano keyboard sound that you have on this track if you listen to the original. And these awesome chords with these suspended fourths and inversions and stuff. So I was always excited when anything good came on MTV or VH1, because it was becoming increasingly dreadful, and unfortunately has continued down that path to the present day, where it's almost completely unlistenable. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, I remember sitting watching this really strange music video where the band were playing like on a riverbed in the woods at night. There were only three members of the band, and I remember thinking that was quite strange. I was trying to work out who was playing what, because I couldn't see a bass player, and they had this unusual lineup of a vocalist with a keyboard player and drums. So an unusual lineup, an unusual sound, and I was intrigued. So I went out the following week and I bought their debut album, which was called Hopes and Fears, and I didn't listen to it at first. At the time, I decided, Lindsay and I had planned a trip through Italy, down to finishing up in our village of Villa Latina, my dad's hometown. But we started at the top, so we were flying into Milan. So I kept this thinking that I would keep this as a kind of holiday album and have a listen to it on holiday. So at the time, Lindsay was studying psychology at Glasgow University, and she'd taken a module on history of art for one of our extra modules. And she'd planned this trip, wanting to go and see all these different galleries and cathedrals and churches, to see all the artwork and things which she knew everything about, which was great because I had my own sort of little tour guide taking me around my own country. But as an Italian, I'm biased, like completely biased towards how amazing Italy is. But I think you'll be hard pushed to find a more incredible and diverse country, both visually and historically, not to mention culinary. So we were just blown away by the amazing trip, the amazing sights that we were seeing in all these different cities. And I remember writing or trying to write lots of song lyrics and stuff when we were away. I kept sitting in places and thinking about all these amazing poets and artists who had sat in these cities like Florence and Bologna and Venice and Rome, and sort of thought about being in the same places they must have been hundreds of years ago, creating these wonderful masterpieces and hoping to create my own little masterpiece. So yeah, it was a great trip, fantastic trip. And one of the things that stood out was that album. I remember listening to that album throughout the trip, and I remember we were on a train from Venice to Bologna. Both amazing cities to visit if you haven't before. But we were on this train from Venice to Bologna. The weather was amazing the entire trip, but I remember there was like this thunder and lightning storm as we left Venice and headed to Bologna, and thankfully it only lasted for about half an hour. Linz fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, as always on every trip that we do on the train, and I remember sort of sitting with one headphone in and trying to write some lyrics for songs, and the train stopped, and this older lady, she came and she sat down in the same booth as us on the train, and I could have nodded and smiled and said hello, and then didn't speak to her for about 10-15 minutes. I was sitting writing my song lyrics. And then I think she was struggling with something. I don't remember exactly what happened, but she needed to know about a stop or something. And at that point, I realised that she wasn't Italian, and she didn't speak English or Italian, and explained to me in Spanish that she was from Argentina. And I don't speak a word of Spanish, so I understood not much of what she was saying at first. And then I sort of tried to concentrate on the words and realised that there was a real similarity between Italian and Spanish. So I understood that she was visiting her son, who was studying in Bologna, and she was telling me that it's the oldest university in the world, which I didn't know. And she spoke Spanish for the entire time that she was on the train, talking about it. I think she was sitting there for about an hour talking in Spanish to me as I spoke back to her in Italian, and somehow we understood each other. I told her about my songwriting and that I was a singer, and she told me that she had other children. She'd left her other children in Argentina to come and visit her son. She was so proud that her son had moved to Italy and he was studying at this wonderful university and making a new life for himself. And we talked for ages about everything. She told me a wee bit about her life story, how she'd wanted to study but didn't have this sort of resources or money, the circumstances available to make that happen when she was younger, and how she'd had kids very young, and motherhood had become her vocation in life, and she didn't have any regrets about it. And just a lovely old lady. And when she got off the train a couple of stops before Bologna city centre, I remember putting my earphones back in, and the first song that came on my mini disc player. There's an explanation that I might have to throw in to you young listeners. A mini disc was this thing that Sony invented. It must have been mid to late 90s. It was supposed to be the thing that replaced the CD. It was like a wee mini CD inside a plastic case, somewhere between a CD and a cassette. The beauty of minidisc is you could record to it. At that point, it was harder to record to CD. Eventually, it was something that became possible. But yeah, it was great. You could compress files and cram a few albums onto one minidisc, and the player was like this tiny wee thing that you could put in your pocket. So before the MP3 came along and sort of destroyed Sony's hopes and dreams of making the minidisc player, a massive part of history. It came and went in the space of maybe about 5 years, where a few people bought one, and then it just, before it really took off, it died, sadly. But anyway, I had a mini disc player with all my favourite albums on my wee mini discs, and it was great, a great compact way of listening to music. Anyway, the old lady, she left the train, she gave me a wave, and I put my headphones back in, and the first song that came on my mini disc player was Somewhere Only We Know. And I remember waving to her as she left, as we left the platform, and just thinking how sad it is that you maybe meet somebody. You have these sort of chance meetings with people sometimes in life, and then you speak to them briefly, and you know you'll never see them again. Like, I instantly knew, I was like, I'm never going to bump into that lady again. It's, so we just spent that wee hour chatting away and getting to know each other on the train, and then she went off to her life and I went off to mine. And I suppose I think it's kind of sad. I kind of get quite deep about things like that. So, but yeah, it was kind of sad thinking that I'd never see her again, and we had that wee moment on the train together. So, anyway, that's my wee story about the song. That's what it reminds me of. When I listen to that song, I always think back to that train journey and the old lady from Argentina. I'd just been blown away by Keane. Actually, I think it was the first time that I'd been kind of interested in a band for quite some time at that point, because, as I said before, music was becoming increasingly like it is today. It's just throwaway pop songs, an artist's famous for 2 or 3 songs, and then they disappear into the wilderness and the abyss, and you never really notice them again. There are a few artists now who are out who repeatedly get to number one, like Ed Sheeran and folk like that, but most artists now, it's somebody featured in something else, and it's in the charts on the radio for a few weeks, and they maybe follow up with another single, and then they disappear, and then we're on to the next thing. It's very sort of, I remember Freddie Mercury had this quote about music being like a Bic razor. You use it once and you discard it, and that's the end of it. And music's become very much like that, sadly. And anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole of me moaning about the current musical world that we sadly live as part of. So anyway, we'll get into Keane. Keane, 3-piece band from England, very, very successful for about a decade. They did very, very well. They're still going, I think, but not quite as popular as they were in their kind of peak, especially with that debut album and the couple of follow-up albums, sort of 2004 and till about 2010. Very, very big band. Really, Tom Chaplin, the singer, has got a really, really nice vocal technique. A very underrated singer, actually. Great at getting up high into his range without having to push too much volume. And this is something that I always talk to students about. If you can only get to a note when you're at full volume, then the muscles aren't strong enough. You're shouting. You're basically shouting. I get singers saying, "Oh, I managed to hit a C5." You shouted a C5 because you're about 4 notes below that when I hear them singing at the piano. So a lot of the time you're shouting and you're recruiting non-singing muscles, swallowing muscles, all sorts of things to get to a certain note, which isn't a healthy way of getting to high notes. So Tom Chaplin has a wonderful ability to do this, a wonderful mix voice, a great ability to resonate and amplify notes without shouting at them. And he moves between head and chest voice really, really nicely at varying places in his range. So some singers will switch from chest voice to head voice at the same place every time. And this is okay, but it has its limitations. Tom seems to be able to enter the passaggio, which is the passage from chest to head voice, or the mix or the bridge, at various moments in his pitch. And this comes from having a really well constructed head voice that's able to come all the way down into what we would normally consider an area for chest voice, and also being able to take your chest voice up into some higher notes without pushing too hard. So really nice vocal technique as well. Again, I won't go into too much detail on the vocal technique. I don't want to bore any non-singers, but yeah, wonderful voice, great band, and a great song. And as I said, just reminds me of that trip that we took through Italy in 2004. A wonderful trip. And the old lady from Argentina and I wonder where she is now. But yeah, that's my wee story for today. A nice short one, and not too deep after last week's sort of lime heavy episode. So thanks again for tuning in. Please like and share and subscribe if you haven't already. Share it to your friends if you think they might be interested in hearing somebody tell daft stories about what songs remind them of, and then do cover versions of them. Click on part 2, which will come up here, if you want to hear my version of Somewhere Only We Know. And I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.